Welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. In today's programme, we look at tensions in Burkina Faso. It's one of the biggest tests for the president's 27-year-old rule in the West African nation. And we also look at the continued international response to the Ebola outbreak. But first, as tensions reach boiling point in the occupied city of Jerusalem, the al-Aqsa compound has been sealed by Israeli forces for the first time in more than 40 years. Yasmin Khatun takes a look at an increasingly volatile situation.
Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas has called the closure of Masjid al-Aqsa by Israeli forces a declaration of war. Israel has completely sealed off the al-Aqsa masjid for the first time in decades. The masjid was sealed off late last night with hundreds of worshippers performing dawn prayers in the streets outside the holy site after Israeli forces closed all entrances. In a statement, the director of the masjid said, "It is unacceptable that the Al-Aqsa Mosque pays a toll for the events in Jerusalem. The mosque is a place for prayer and worship, and all Muslims have the right to access it." This is the first time the masjid has been completely sealed off since 1967. The closing of the masjid comes amid rising tensions in occupied Jerusalem. A Palestinian man was shot dead by Israeli police this morning after an attack on far-right Israeli activist Ehud Glick in the city. The far-right activist was shot as he left a conference promoting a Jewish campaign to permit praying within the Al-Aqsa compound, an issue thought to be central to long-running tensions. The Palestinian man killed in his home is thought to be 32-year-old Muattaz Hijazi. The Al-Aqsa Masjid is the third holiest site in Islam and is also revered by Jews. It is the place where Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is thought to have elevated to the heavens. There is currently heavy police deployment in the city as tensions have continued to rise with almost nightly clashes between Israeli security forces and Palestinian protesters. Palestinian anger has been fueled by settlers moving into Palestinian neighbourhoods and a high presence of Israeli police in the sacred masjid. Right-wing Israelis have long sought permission to be able to pray within the masjid's grounds. And earlier this week, in a highly provocative move, Israel's appointed mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, visited the Al-Aqsa Masjid, accompanied by Israeli policemen. East Jerusalem was captured by Israel along with Gaza and the West Bank in the 1967 Six-Day War. And in 1980, Israel declared all of Jerusalem its capital, in a move not recognized internationally. As tensions come to a head in the sacred city, this move on a site revered by Muslims all over the world is a dangerous challenge to an already volatile situation. The Palestinian Authority have said they will hold Israel accountable, but we're yet to see what exactly that means. Yasmin Khatun, The Report.
Well, joining me to discuss this on Skype is Dr Daud Abdullah, Director of the Middle East Monitor, and on the phone, Ismail Patel, Chair of the Friends of Al-Aqsa. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Daud, President Abbas has said that this is a declaration of war. Is it?
It can be interpreted this way, mainly because Israel has been evicting civilians from their homes and not just, violating the sanctity of the mosque. So it has breached all conventions and abused the rights of the Palestinian people. And in that sense, it is perceived or may be interpreted as a war. But there is something that must be understood here. Vice President Abbas may correctly describe it as such. The security forces have spared no effort trying to suppress the popular protests across the West Bank. And in this sense, his remarks are contradictory to the policies of his authority in Ramallah.
Ismail, just fill us in with some of the background here, because this is happening in the midst of a very considerable further push on settlement, isn't it?
Yeah, good afternoon, John.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very sad and very alarming of what Israel is doing. Of course, it's camouflaging some of its settlement activities and expansion into West Bank. And it's using this opportunity to really isolate the Al-Aqsa from the Palestinians and the Muslim world. And I think we should be very alarmed at the provocative steps that have been taken by Israel.
And it's also at a moment when in the British Parliament we've had a vote to recognise Palestine. The Swedish Parliament has voted to do the same thing, and now the Israeli government has said it's going to withdraw its ambassador. So it's a heightening of tensions, possibly on an international scale as well.
Well, I think that Israeli saber-rattling is trying to blackmail the international community in not wanting to recognize Palestine as a state. And this is a one way of seeing it, to say that we will do whatever we like to the Palestinians, and literally, metaphorically saying, showing two fingers to the world community, to the international norms, the laws, and by which we ourselves conduct. And I think the international community needs to wake up to the bullying approach tactics of Israel and not take this in silence. And we must make our voice heard, and we must condemn Israel, and we hope that our Prime Minister will come out and condemn them for the provocative actions that they've been taking.
Daud, how do you see this news now reacting on the international situation?
I think there's a recognition in Israel that the tide is turning against them internationally. It's been abandoned by its allies and friends in the West, in Europe in particular. One country after another has declared its intent to recognize, the state of Palestine, whether we speak of France, which is notoriously pro-Israel, Italy, Sweden today, Britain, of course, they vote in the parliament. So the tide is really turning, and as well Spain. And what they fear is that Mahmoud Abbas, were he to carry out his threat to go to the Security Council, the Americans the view in Washington now is that the Americans may not use the veto and may, abstain from a vote, and therefore give even greater credibility to the Palestinian initiative. And that is their fear. So they try to seek it to create, a de facto situation before any political gains are made on the international scene.
And this crisis now around the al-Aqsa mosque, how are the Jordanians reacting? Because they're kind of charged with the administration of the area in some ways, aren't they?
They are certainly, according to the Wadi Arabi agreement, the sovereignty rests with the Jordanians, and their parliament has voted recently, calling on the government to assert its right in Jerusalem and to protect the sacred sites. Unfortunately, this is an authority, the monarchy and the government in Jordan is very closely aligned to the Israelis and have been placating, or may I say appeasing, the expansionist agenda of the Netanyahu government.
Ismail, what do you think in the minds of the Israeli government they're seeking to achieve here?
Well, I think they're trying to, as they've always done, create what's known as facts on the ground. So as Dr. Daud has very well elaborated, the fact that they want to have as much control of Jerusalem as possible before that vote takes place at the United Nations, so that also becomes a negotiating chip for the Israelis. Now, if they take over the mosque, it will become in their hands, and then the Palestinians will be backfooted to try and request or negotiate over something else. And I think basically Israel is holding up to the last straws now and using tactics that is going to even isolate it further in the international arena. And we hope is that it doesn't come to that, and the Palestinians will hopefully able to resist the Israeli maneuvers and the actions that they're trying to take over the past few days.
And what do you think the effect of this will be on relations between the Palestinian Authority and the mass of Palestinians? Because we know that before the bombardment of Gaza, the Authority was under very great pressure from Palestinians. Palestinian Authority soldiers were being stoned in the streets. If they don't react over this, they're going to face that again, aren't they?
I think so. I think it's a very unknown equation in this whole conflict that's emerging at the moment, because I think it will expose Abbas, because he has the two-faced approach. One, what he says publicly about condemning the actions of Israelis and saying that this is a provocation of war, but really privately and practically on the ground, he's stopping his own people against reacting and confronting the Israeli occupation forces. And therefore, I think these people will rise up. And it could be possible that we might, before seeing any changes in Jerusalem, we might see changes in Ramallah. And that could be something that, has been happening over the past decade, at least past few years around the Middle East. and could be a chance, a time for Palestine itself.
How do you read it like that, Daud? That's an interesting thought that might be the possible development of events.
Is a tremendous anger across the West Bank. Even the Israelis themselves, admit. They said in their media, if you follow it very closely, they admit that what is happening in Jerusalem is a quiet intifada. There is resistance on the ground. A day does not pass now without some clashes, between the Israeli forces, the occupation, the settlers, and the Palestinians in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, it's not picked up very much in the West. It's not covered. But on a daily basis, there are clashes. People are resisting, not just for the holy sites, as I pointed out earlier, but even for their homes. And this is, something that really runs parallel to what we see in other parts of the region. In Iraq, for example, where Christians were evicted from their churches and the Yazidis from their homes by ISIS. So too, the settlers are conducting a similar policy based on bigotry, based on expansionism, based on exclusivity for themselves. There's no difference between what ISIS is doing in Iraq and Syria and what these settlers are doing in Jerusalem.
Do you think, Daud, that the Israeli government, while generally probably more isolated than it's ever been, is drawing some succour from the fact that the Egyptian government has closed the Rafah crossing and seems intent on setting up its own buffer zone?
Certainly. I mean, this is it's not only the Egyptians. They are, insofar as Jerusalem is concerned, there are reports circulating in the Arab media that the United Arab Emirates, for example, have been involved in facilitating, the transfer of property in occupied Jerusalem to settlers, contributing funds through middlemen, and this is, it's a cause of great concern among Palestinians that Arab states are themselves, colluding with the occupation. Yes, the Egyptians are playing a part, but there are others. And the point is, you see, they have supported the West in this so-called war against ISIS in Syria, fighting what they call terrorism. And the real terror here is in Jerusalem. This is terror. So the eviction of people from their homes, the commandeering of holy sites, and killing and wounding of civilians. This is the real terror.
I mean, Ismail, it's a staggering paradox, a contrast at any rate, to see some Western states recognising at least the principle of Palestinian statehood while the Egyptians are sealing the crossing to Gaza, isn't it?
Well, I think we have to come off with this idea that simply because they're Arabs, they're going to be supporting the Palestinians. I think ideology is more closer now than blood relationships or culture. And I think we have to accept that and go beyond our traditional thinking of the region. And ideology is basically dictatorship and oppression and subjugation of its public. So all the states around the region who do that are together, and that includes Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, including to a certain extent Jordan and Saudi Arabia as well. So all these countries are acting in concert with each other to subjugate its people. And of course, the Palestinians are paying a very, very high price here, because traditionally we would have thought that these countries would be helping them. And the world community is somehow always turning towards them and looking at them. And I think we have to go beyond that and look at what we can do and ignore these people and accept that they will be part of the Zionist narrative and try and emphasize and make sure that Israel succeeds over the Palestinians.
Daud, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I guess what Ismail is saying is that, some of the old shibboleths and some of the old frameworks have to be put aside, and we have to focus on fundamental principles here. Are you for or against dictatorship? Are you for or against an apartheid state? These are international questions, not limited to what people in the region may feel are older loyalties.
Exactly, and Brother Ismail is absolutely right on this. These are these rulers in the neighboring states that surround Palestine. They are Zionists. They are Arab Zionists. They support the Zionist state and its occupationist agenda. Even the Israelis, yesterday they said so. Leading general, he said that the measures taken by the Egyptians are strengthening Israel's ability, enhancing its ability against Hamas. So, and it's unfortunate, But in the context of what's happening here, blood is not the important factor. It is the ideology, it is the policy, it is what people do on the ground and not what they say.
Okay. Well, Daud Abdullah, Ismail Patel, thanks very much for that discussion, but I'm afraid we're going to have to draw it to a close now. But before we go on to our break, let's see what's been trending on Twitter today. The video of a female actor who recorded 10 hours of catcalls from passers-by as she walked through New York City has got people discussing sexual harassment. At Andrea Paola 11 says, "This is harassment, being called out in public, stared down and followed by a stranger. It makes a woman feel violated." Rhythm Images asked, "What is the appropriate way to approach a woman?" And at Tariq Z brought a new angle to the discussion, highlighting the harassment Muslim women face daily in the same city. In other topics, Palestinian-US activist Razmia Odeh got Twitter's attention, and Linda Hemby said more than 65 human rights groups have signed a statement opposing the indictment of the activist, with @FreePali saying, "The Israeli, in quotation marks, I mean US justice system at work." In Kashmir, the arrest of separatist leader Mohammed Yassin Malik has drawn intense debate, with Chanayak Niti 1 saying Yassin Malik created hurdles in the relief operations during the Kashmir flood. Now he disrupts the election process. Nothing less than a treason charge be slapped. At Project Kashmir responded, "If not Yassin Malik and Kashmir Muslims, we would have died of hunger." And lastly, with Halloween around the corner, a Halloween school event in Malaysia has got people talking. At the James Brandon questions whether conservative voices fear the dilution of identities among Muslim students, with @BN Cybertroopers saying, "I'm not sure if Halloween was ever celebrated in Malaysia. Muslims do not celebrate." Okay, well, that's it for the first part of the show, but do stay tuned after the break when we'll be looking at the latest news, including a chaotic day in Burkina Faso, West Africa, where protests have continued against plans to allow President Blaise Compaoré to extend his 27-year rule. Well, we'll also be looking at the continued international response to the Ebola outbreak. Don't go away.